Welcome to Heartbreak Chronicles. Elijah Torres wiped the grease from his hands and glanced at the clock on the wall. 8:30 in the evening, another long workday. As one of the most trusted electricians in the Charlotte area, his service appointments were always packed. 15 years of experience had built him a solid reputation in the industry, enough to sustain a comfortable middle-class life. Laughter from his daughter Sophie drifted down from upstairs, where she was watching TV with his wife Elena. As Elijah climbed the stairs, he noticed Elena's phone flickering again. In recent months, that phone seemed to capture her attention more than he ever could. "Work finished?" Elena asked without looking up, her gaze still fixed on the animated show on the screen. There was an impatience in her tone, as if his presence interrupted something important. "The Riverside Commercial District project is complete." Elijah stopped at the doorway, observing his wife. Elena was a third-grade teacher at Wellington Elementary, and they had been married for 10 years. Once, she would show genuine interest in his work projects, asking about technical challenges he faced, taking pride in his ability to solve complex electrical problems. Now, she seemed to regard him as a necessary evil. "Mommy, when are we going to see Grandma?" 7-year-old Sophie asked, tugging at Elena's sleeve. "Soon, sweetheart. Grandma's back injury hasn't healed yet. The doctor says she needs someone to take care of her." Elena gently stroked her daughter's hair, her voice immediately becoming as gentle as spring breeze. Elijah frowned. His mother-in-law Margaret lived in Riverside, a 2-hour drive away, and had indeed recently injured her back from slipping in the bathroom. But Elena had already visited 3 times, staying a week each time, and she always returned looking refreshed and energetic, nothing like the exhaustion expected from caring for a patient. "I want to see Grandma too. It was fun when we went together last time." Sophie pouted. "Next time, little princess. Grandma needs absolute quiet right now. Children are too noisy." Elena said, her eyes drifting again to the phone on the coffee table. The screen lit up again, and she quickly picked it up to check. Elijah noticed the smile that flashed across Elena's face, an expression he hadn't seen in a long time, full of secret joy. She quickly replied to something, then closed the screen, but the intimacy revealed in her movements made Elijah uneasy. "What would you like for dinner?" Elijah asked, trying to hide the doubts rising in his heart. "Anything is fine. I'm going upstairs to grade papers." Elena stood up, clutching her phone and hurrying upstairs, leaving Elijah and Sophie in the living room. That night, Elijah tossed and turned in bed. Elena had her back to him, claiming to be looking at lesson plans, but the light from her screen was particularly conspicuous in the darkness. She would laugh softly from time to time, her fingers sliding rapidly across the screen. Whenever Elijah tried to see clearly what she was doing, she would adjust the angle, skillfully blocking the screen. At 2 in the morning, Elena finally put down her phone. But Elijah noticed she didn't fall asleep immediately, instead lying quietly, as if savoring some pleasant memory. The distance between them felt farther than the width of the bed, like an invisible but solid wall. The next morning, Elena seemed unusually cheerful while preparing breakfast in the kitchen. She hummed a tune, moved lightly, radiating a vitality Elijah hadn't seen in a long time. "I need to go take care of Margaret for another week," she announced while frying eggs, her tone barely concealing excitement. "So frequently?" Elijah asked while tying his tie. "Is her condition really that serious?" "What did the doctor say?" "You know, elderly people recover slowly, and she lives alone. How can she manage without someone to care for her?" Elena's tone became somewhat defensive. "Didn't you always say work keeps you busy? If I go for a few days, you can focus on those big projects." Elijah nodded, but doubt began to take root in his heart like seeds. He remembered when Elena went to Riverside last time. He called Margaret to ask about her recovery, and the old woman mentioned Elena often went out, saying she had important things to handle. At the time, he didn't think much of it, but now those important things seemed suspicious. "Sophie also wants to see Grandma. We could drive over on the weekend, have a family reunion," Elijah said tentatively. Elena's hand clearly paused, the spatula hovering in the pan for several seconds. "No need. Margaret needs absolute quiet. The doctor especially emphasized this point. And didn't you say you wanted a bid on the Henderson Mall electrical renovation project? That project is important. The project can wait. Family is more important. Elijah insisted, carefully observing Elena's reaction. Elijah, I said it's not needed. Elena's voice suddenly became sharp, the sound of the pan hitting the stove particularly jarring. You stay home to take care of Sophie and focus on work. I can handle Margaret's situation. She turned to face Elijah, her eyes flashing with an emotion he had never seen before. Not anger, but something close to panic, like a cornered animal. That afternoon, as Elena's white Honda Civic drove out of the driveway, Elijah stood at the window watching. Her suitcase seemed larger than necessary for caring for a patient, and he noticed she took that red dress, one of her most expensive pieces, definitely not something to wear while caring for the sick. Over the next few days, Elijah began noticing details he had previously overlooked. Elena's daily text messages were unusually brief, lacking any emotional color, as if completing a task. Her video calls with Sophie were also strange, always with the same white wall in the background, showing no characteristics of Margaret's home. Even stranger, when Elijah tried calling Margaret, the old woman's answers were evasive. She said Elena was very busy, often out handling things, but when asked about specific recovery details, Margaret's voice didn't sound like someone suffering from severe back pain. Wednesday night, Elijah made a decision. He needed the truth, whatever it was. Sophie, would you like to give Mommy and Grandma a surprise? He said to his daughter who was drawing. What surprise? Sophie looked up, her eyes bright. We'll go see them on Saturday, but don't tell Mommy in advance. Really? Sophie jumped up excitedly. I can give my rainbow drawing to Grandma. Of course. But this is our secret, okay? Elijah had a voice in his heart warning him, but he had to know the truth. As an electrician, his professional training made him unable to ignore fault signals in a system. Now, his instincts told him there was a serious short circuit in his marriage, and he needed to find the source of the problem. Saturday morning, Elijah and Sophie set off for Riverside. During the 2-hour drive, Sophie sang excitedly in the passenger seat, completely unaware that this trip might change her world. When will we get there? This was Sophie's 10th time asking this question. Soon, sweetheart. Just a few more minutes to Grandma's house. Elijah looked at the GPS, only 5 minutes from the destination. His heartbeat began to accelerate, his palms sweating. Margaret lived in a quiet residential area, with houses all built in the 1970s, single-story brick homes. This was a typical middle-class retirement community, neat and peaceful. Elijah had only visited a few times before, but he remembered the route. That's the blue house. Sophie pointed ahead. I remember Grandma's windmill decoration by the door. Elijah parked across the street and turned off the engine. Margaret's house looked completely normal, the front lawn neatly trimmed, but one detail struck him as odd. Only Margaret's old Buick was parked in the driveway. No sign of Elena's Honda. Strange, where's Mommy's car? Elijah muttered to himself. Maybe it's in the garage? Sophie suggested, but Margaret's garage door was tightly closed, and from appearances, it hadn't been used in a long time. They walked toward the front door, Sophie skipping ahead. As they approached the house, Elijah heard voices from inside, television, sounds, and conversation. But what confused him more was that among the conversation, there was a male voice, one he didn't recognize. Sounds like they're home. Elijah told Sophie, but his doubts intensified rather than diminished. Sophie reached out to ring the doorbell, but suddenly stopped. Daddy, the door's open, she whispered. Elijah looked at the front door. Indeed, the heavy wooden door was slightly ajar, leaving about a 1-inch gap. Through the gap, he could hear the voices inside more clearly. News playing on TV, and people laughing and talking. What shocked Elijah most was that he heard Elena's laughter, that kind of heartfelt, joyful laughter he hadn't heard in a long time. Daddy, look, but be quiet, Sophie whispered, standing on tiptoe to peek inside. Elijah gently pushed the door open, the larger opening allowing him to see a corner of the living room. What he saw made his blood freeze. Margaret was indeed sitting in her familiar armchair. but she looked completely healthy, showing none of the pain a back injury patient should display. She was even laughing and talking to someone. More shocking still, Elena sat on the sofa, wearing that red dress, her hair carefully styled, wearing elegant makeup. Beside her, sitting very close, was a man Elijah had never seen. The man was about 40, tall, wearing an expensive polo shirt, his dark hair combed meticulously. His hand was gently stroking Elena's shoulder, while Elena nestled against his chest, their intimate posture clearly indicating the nature of their relationship. I told you, Elijah would never suspect anything. Elena's voice came clearly, with a tone of smugness. He's too focused on his wires and tools to notice anything else. Are you sure? The man's voice was deep and concerned. What if he finds out? Finds out what? He doesn't even know we've been planning this for so long. Elena laughed louder. When our relationship is more stable, I'll tell him I want a divorce. By then, I'll have already consulted lawyers and arranged Sophie's custody. Do you think the court will award Sophie to you? Of course. I'm her mother, and I have a stable job. Elijah is just a blue-collar worker who works late every day. I can prove I'm better suited to raise Sophie. Elijah felt the world spinning, not just because of Elena's betrayal, but because they were calmly discussing taking away Sophie, taking away his daughter, as if she were a piece of property to be divided. Is Mommy inside? Sophie's innocent voice broke through Elijah's shock. Just then, footsteps came from the living room. Elena's voice became alert. Margaret, did you hear something? Elijah realized they were about to be discovered. He quickly made a decision, gently pushing open the door and walking in with Sophie. Surprise! Sophie shouted loudly, completely unaware of the tense atmosphere in the room. Everyone in the living room froze. Elena's face instantly lost all color, as if she had seen a ghost. The strange man quickly moved away from Elena's side, but it was too late. Margaret looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. Elijah. Elena's voice trembled. How are you here? Sophie ran toward her mother, but stopped when she saw the strange man. Mommy, who is this uncle? Why are you wearing such a pretty dress? The air in the room seemed to solidify. Elena opened her mouth, but no sound came out. The man uneasily stepped back. Elijah slowly surveyed the room, imprinting every detail in his memory. Elena's careful grooming, the man's expensive clothing, Margaret's obviously healthy state, and the tense atmosphere permeating the room. Elena, Elijah's voice was terrifyingly calm. I think you need to introduce your friend. Elena looked at the man, then at Elijah, then at Sophie. Her eyes held panic, guilt, and the irritation of being caught red-handed. Elijah, I can explain. She began, her voice barely audible. I think you'd better explain. Elijah's voice remained calm, but each word was as cold as ice. Especially in front of our daughter. The man finally spoke, his voice carrying forced confidence. Look, I think we should all calm down. I wasn't talking to you. Elijah turned to him, his gaze sharp as knives. I don't even know who you are, but I think I'll know very soon. Margaret cleared her throat, trying to break the deadlock. Maybe I should take Sophie to the kitchen. No. Elijah's voice was firm. Sophie should be here. She has the right to know what her mother is doing. Elena suddenly exploded. Elijah, you shouldn't have come here. I told you I needed time to take care of my mother. Take care. Elijah repeated the word, looking around. Margaret looks very healthy. In fact, she looks healthier than I've ever seen her. My back. Margaret began, but her voice lacked conviction. Your back is obviously fully recovered. Elijah said, recovered enough for you to serve as cover for my wife and her lover. He's not my lover. Elena shouted, but her protest sounded hollow. Then what is he? Elijah's voice became dangerous. Why are you dressed up? Why were you so intimate? Why did you tell him I would never suspect anything? Realizing her words had been overheard, Elena's face grew even paler. Mommy, why are you shouting? Sophie looked frightened. Daddy, what's happening? Elijah realized he needed to protect his daughter from this adult drama. He knelt down and said gently to Sophie, Sweetheart, why don't you go to the kitchen with Grandma for some juice? The adults need to discuss some things. Sophie looked at the tense adults around her, nodded, and followed Margaret out of the living room. Once Sophie was out of sight, Elijah stood up, facing Elena and her companion. The atmosphere in the room immediately became more tense. Now, his voice was low and threatening. "You're going to tell me exactly what's been happening. How long has this been going on?" Elena and the man exchanged a glance, that glance telling Elijah everything he needed to know. This wasn't a chance encounter. This wasn't a new development. This was a relationship, a carefully planned relationship that had been going on for a long time. "My name is Richard Blackwood." The man finally introduced himself. "I'm the assistant principal at Elena's school." "Assistant principal," Elijah repeated, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "So you're her boss. You used your position of power to seduce a married woman." "This isn't seduction," Richard defended, but his voice lacked confidence. We fell in love." Elijah almost laughed out loud. "Love? You're having an affair in my mother-in-law's house, lying about her being sick and needing care. This is your love." "We haven't hurt anyone." Elena joined the defense, but her voice sounded hollow. "Elijah, you have to understand, our marriage has been over for a long time." "Over?" Elijah felt like he'd been punched in the chest. "When did it end? When you started meeting with him? Or when you started planning to take Sophie away?" Elena's eyes flickered, betraying her secret plans. "Did you think I didn't hear?" Elijah continued. "You were discussing custody, discussing how to make me look unfit to care for Sophie. You turned my daughter into a pawn in your game." "Sophie is my daughter." Elena fought back, her voice filled with desperate anger. "I have the right to make decisions about her future. You have the right to betray her father. You have the right to make her live in lies. You have the right to make her think you're caring for a sick grandmother while you're actually with another man." Elijah's voice began to rise, 10 years of anger and disappointment erupting like a volcano. "Don't drag Sophie into this," Elena shouted. "This is between us. Sophie is already in this." Elijah roared. "She's our daughter. Or in your new plan, is she just property to be transferred to your new boyfriend?" Richard tried to interject. "Listen, Elijah, we never wanted to hurt Sophie." "Shut up." Elijah turned to him, his eyes burning with fury. "You have no right to mention my daughter's name. You're a homewrecker, someone who abuses his position to seduce subordinates. You have no say in my marriage. This isn't fair." Elena's voice became shrill. "You're never home. You never care about my feelings. You never ask what I want. So this is your solution? Betrayal? Lies? Planning to take my daughter away?" Elijah's voice was full of pain and anger. "If you were unhappy, you should have told me. We should have talked. We should have tried to work things out." "Talk." Elena let out a harsh laugh. "When? You leave at 7 in the morning, don't come home until 9 at night. Weekends you're in the garage fixing your equipment. When do we have time to talk?" Maybe she had a point, but now wasn't the time for self-reflection. Now was the time for action. "How long has this been going on?" he asked again, this time more firmly. The real timeline. Elena and Richard exchanged glances again. 8 months, Elena finally admitted. 8 months, Elijah repeated, quickly calculating the timeline in his mind. "So you started last summer, right when Sophie began the new school year." Elijah, "Shut up. Let me think." Elijah began pacing, his military training allowing him to maintain rational thought even in extreme anger. 8 months ago, you suddenly became more concerned about your appearance. New clothes, new hairstyle, new skincare products. I thought you just wanted to feel better about yourself." He stopped and looked directly into Elena's eyes. 8 months ago, you started visiting Margaret more frequently. You always came back happy and relaxed. I thought you just enjoyed caring for your mother." Elena couldn't meet his eyes. 8 months ago, you started showing impatience with my work, dissatisfaction with our marriage. I thought it was work stress." Elijah's voice became ice cold. "But actually, you had already found a replacement." "This isn't a replacement," Richard tried to defend. "We truly love each other." Elijah turned to him, his gaze like daggers. "Love? Do you know what love is? Love is honesty. Love is loyalty. Love is sticking together through difficult times, not looking for an escape. Your feelings for Elena aren't love, that's selfish desire. You don't understand our relationship. Richard shot back, showing a flash of anger. You don't understand Elena's feelings. I've known Elena for 10 years, Elijah said. I know she likes hot chocolate on rainy days. Know she's afraid of spiders. Know she has to tell Sophie a bedtime story every night. Do you know these things? Or do you only know what she looks like when she's betraying her husband? Richard's face reddened, but he didn't answer. I want to leave here, Elena suddenly said. I want to take Sophie and leave. No. Elijah's voice was calm but firm. Sophie goes home with me. You can stay here and continue your vacation, but Sophie won't be part of this mess. You can't stop me from being with my daughter. I won't stop you from being with Sophie, but I will stop you from using her, just like you used Margaret. Elijah walked toward the kitchen. Sophie, it's time to go home. Sophie ran out of the kitchen, holding a glass of juice. But we just got here. I haven't shown Grandma my drawing yet. Next time, sweetheart. Mommy and Grandma have some grown-up things to handle. Sophie looked disappointed, but she nodded. She gave Margaret a hug, then followed Elijah toward the door. Mommy, aren't you coming home with us? Sophie asked. Elena knelt down and hugged her daughter, tears filling her eyes. No, sweetheart. Mommy needs to stay here a few more days. Why? Grandma looks fine, Sophie said innocently. Elena looked at Elijah, his expression telling her she needed to handle this herself. Sometimes adults have complicated things to deal with, Elena finally said. You don't need to worry. As they walked toward the door, Elena called out to them. Elijah, we need to talk about this. Elijah didn't turn around. Yes, we do need to, but not now, not in front of Sophie. During the drive home, Sophie asked many questions, but Elijah skillfully avoided the most difficult ones. He told her Mommy and Grandma had some adult matters to handle, and soon everything would be explained. But Elijah knew that nothing would ever return to normal. His marriage was over, his family was broken, but more importantly, he now knew the truth. And knowing the truth meant he could start planning his next move. After arriving home, Elijah let Sophie watch TV while he went down to his basement workshop. This was his thinking place, surrounded by familiar tools and equipment, where he could clear his thoughts. He needed to formulate a plan, not an emotional, impulsive reaction, but a carefully considered, systematic plan. Elena thought she could betray him, and then simply take Sophie to start a new life. But Elijah Torres wasn't the type to give up easily. He took out a notebook and began recording everything that had happened today. Every detail, every conversation, every time point. Then he began recalling the anomalies of the past 8 months, even longer. Elena's behavioral changes, her excuses, her new habits. Patterns began to emerge. Patterns of carefully orchestrated deception. His phone rang. Elena. Elijah. Her voice was tired and tense. Elena, we need to talk. Tomorrow. You come home, we talk face to face. Elijah, you have to understand. I understand more than you think, Elijah interrupted. Tomorrow. He hung up and continued writing his notes. Elena thought she controlled the situation, thought she could end this marriage on her own terms. But she had made a serious mistake. She had underestimated Elijah Torres. She had underestimated what a betrayed father could do to protect his daughter. Now, it was time to let her learn about the real Elijah Torres. The man who wouldn't lose everything without a fight. The man who would use every available resource to protect his family. The gears of revenge began to turn. The next day, Elijah didn't go to work. Instead, he began a comprehensive investigation. The first stop was their bank. As joint account holder, he had the right to view all transaction records. Bank manager Amanda Pierce was a friend of many years, and when Elijah requested detailed account activity, she looked somewhat confused but didn't refuse. Any particular reason? Amanda asked, pulling up the records on her computer. Just want to check some unusual expenses. Elijah answered, trying to keep his voice calm. When the printed records were placed in front of him, Elijah felt his stomach tighten. Over the past 8 months, there are dozens of expenses he knew nothing about. High-end restaurant bills, hotel charges from places he'd never seen, expensive clothing store purchases, even some jewelry store transactions. More infuriating still, there was a new bank account, one with only Elena's name, opened 3 months ago. Every month, there were transfers from their joint account to this new account, totaling over $10,000. Amanda, Elijah pointed to those transfer records. I need details on this new account. Amanda looked at the records, her expression becoming serious. Elijah, this account only has Elena's name. According to bank policy, I can't. Understand. But as her husband, I have the right to know where our marital assets are going. Amanda hesitated, then nodded. Let me see what I can do. 10 minutes later, Elijah received even more shocking information. Elena's new account not only received transfers from their joint account, but also deposits from other sources. Tracing the sources of these deposits, Elijah discovered a disturbing pattern. Richard Blackwood's name appeared on multiple transfers. This Richard Blackwood, Elijah pointed to the record. Do you know who he is? Amanda searched on her computer. He's also our client. Looks like he transferred quite a bit of money to Elena's account during the same period. Elijah felt anger surge through him like a tide. Not only was Elena secretly transferring their shared assets, but Richard was also providing her with additional funding. This wasn't just an emotional relationship. This was carefully planned financial fraud. Leaving the bank, Elijah's next stop was Wellington Elementary. As Sophie's father, he had the right to communicate with her teachers and principal. But his real purpose was to learn more about Richard Blackwood. The school's receptionist, Mrs. Harrison, recognized Elijah and greeted him warmly. Mr. Blackwood isn't at school today, she told Elijah. He's been taking leave frequently recently. We're all worried because this isn't like his usual style. Leave? Elijah asked casually. For what reason? He said personal reasons. Principal Mitchell looks very unhappy about it, but she hasn't revealed details. Elijah nodded, already understanding the reason for Richard's frequent absences. He was using work time to date Elena. Is Mr. Blackwood a good colleague? Elijah continued probing. Mrs. Harrison's expression became somewhat complex. Hey, he's a capable administrator. But recently there have been some rumors. She paused. I shouldn't spread gossip. What kind of rumors? Some people say he has an overly intimate relationship with a certain teacher. Of course, this might just be idle talk. Elijah thanked Mrs. Harrison and left the school. Now he was certain that Richard and Elena's relationship had become an open secret, at least within the school. Over the next few hours, Elijah conducted deeper investigation. He searched Richard Blackwood's public records and found some interesting information. Richard had been married before, but divorced 3 years ago. The divorce records showed the reason as irreconcilable differences, but court documents hinted at infidelity issues. More importantly, Elijah discovered Richard had similar problems at his previous position. 5 years ago, when he served as assistant principal in another school district, he was investigated for an inappropriate relationship with a married teacher. Although not fired, he quickly transferred to his current school. This painted a clear picture. Richard Blackwood was a repeat offender, specifically using his position of power to seduce female subordinates. Elena wasn't his first victim, and very likely wouldn't be his last. That night, when Elena returned home, Elijah was ready. He sat at the kitchen table with bank records, court documents, and other evidence neatly arranged in front of him. We need to talk, Elena said, but when she saw the documents on the table, her voice became weak. Yes, we certainly do, Elijah replied, his voice calm but threatening. Sit down. Elena slowly sat across from him, her eyes fixed on those documents. She knew she was caught. 8 months of bank records, Elijah began, picking up the first document, showing you secretly opened a new account and transferred over $10,000 from our shared assets. Elena opened her mouth to say something, but Elijah raised his hand to stop her. Richard Blackwood's financial records, showing he transferred thousands of dollars to your secret account. He picked up another document. You didn't just betray me emotionally, you committed financial fraud against me. Elijah, that money is money we earned together, money saved for Sophie's future, money that was our family's security. And you gave it to your lover. Elijah stood up and began pacing. But what's more interesting is Richard's history. He had similar relationships at his previous school. He specializes in seducing married female subordinates. You're just his latest victim in a pattern. Elena's face went pale. That's not true. Richard loves me. Richard loves conquering married women. Elijah corrected her. Look at these court records. 3 years ago, his wife divorced him for the same reason. 5 years ago, he was nearly fired for similar behavior. He pushed the documents toward Elena. Do you think you're special? Do you think you're different from the others? You're just another target in his long-term pattern. Elena picked up the documents, reading the contents. As she read deeper, her expression changed from denial to shock, then to fear. This can't be possible, she murmured. It's completely possible. And now you face a choice. Elijah sat back down, placing his hands on the table. You can immediately end your relationship with Richard, return all transferred funds, and seek marriage counseling. Or what? Elena's voice trembled. Or I submit all this evidence to your school's principal and the school district board. Workplace inappropriate relationships, especially involving financial benefits, will result in both of you being fired. I'll also contact my lawyer, start divorce proceedings, and demand full custody of Sophie. Elena's eyes widened. You can't take Sophie away. I not only can, I will succeed. Elijah's voice was filled with certainty. The court will see this evidence. Your deception, your financial fraud, your behavior involving Sophie and lies. Which judge do you think would give a child to such an irresponsible mother? Elijah, please. We can work this out. Now I want to work things out. Elijah sneered. When your perfect plan has been exposed, when you realize Richard was just using you, now you want to fix our marriage? Elena began crying, but this time Elijah felt no sympathy. I'm giving you 24 hours to consider. He stood up, collecting the documents. Tomorrow night, I want your answer. Either you immediately sever all contact with Richard, return the funds, and commit to marriage counseling, or we go the legal route. What if I choose to leave? Elena asked, her voice weak. Then you leave, but Sophie stays. Elijah's voice was unwavering. And if you try to take any of our shared property when you leave, I'll leave you with nothing. He walked toward the door, then stopped and looked back at Elena. One more thing. If you warn Richard that I'm investigating him, if you try to destroy any evidence, I'll immediately contact the school district board. They have a right to know what kind of person they've employed. That night, Elijah lay in the guest room, listening to Elena making phone calls in the master bedroom. Although he couldn't hear the specific content, her crying clearly conveyed the message. Her perfect plan was crumbling. The next day, Elijah continued his investigative work. He contacted a private investigator, a retired police officer friend, Jake Morrison. I need a complete background check on Richard Blackwood, Elijah told Jake, especially his financial situation and relationship history. Sounds like a divorce case. Jake said, your wife cheating? More complicated than that. I suspect this is part of a larger pattern. Jake nodded. Give me 3 days. I'll get you a complete file. Meanwhile, Elijah made another important decision. He contacted one of Charlotte's best divorce attorneys, Catherine Wells. Catherine was a woman in her 50s with an excellent reputation for handling complex divorce cases. After hearing Elijah's story, her expression became serious. You have a strong case, she told him, especially considering the financial fraud and the child being involved in deception. Are you sure you want to go this route? I want to protect my daughter, Elijah replied. If Elena chooses to continue her betrayal, I need to ensure Sophie has a stable home. Then let's start preparing. Catherine began taking notes. I need copies of all the evidence you've gathered, plus Sophie's school records showing she's thriving under your care. That evening, when Elena sat across the kitchen table from him, she looked like she had aged 10 years. Her eyes were red and swollen, her face pale, her hands trembling constantly. I called Richard, she began, her voice hoarse. I told him about the records you found. What did he say? Elijah asked, though he already guessed the answer. He said he needed time to think. He said maybe we should separate temporarily. Elena's voice broke. He said his job was more important than our relationship. Elijah nodded, not surprised at all. So when things got difficult, he abandoned you, just like he did to the women before you. You were right, Elena admitted. I looked at those records you gave me. He does have a pattern. I'm not the first, and probably won't be the last. So what's your decision? Elijah asked. Elena took a deep breath, struggling to organize her words. I want to fix our marriage. I want to go back to how things were. That's impossible, Elijah said calmly. We can't go back to how things were, because how things were was built on lies. But we could try to build something new, built on honesty. What does that mean? That means you have to face the consequences. Elijah took out a document. This is a draft of a post-nuptial agreement. If you want to stay in this family, you have to sign it. Elena took the document and began reading. As she read deeper, her expression became increasingly shocked. This gives you complete financial control, she said. Yes, you lose the right to manage our finances. You also lose the right to make major decisions without my consent. This is too harsh. The consequences of betrayal usually are harsh. Elijah replied, and this is just the beginning. You also have to immediately resign from Wellington Elementary. What? Elena looked at him in shock. That's my career. That's also where Richard works. I won't risk you reconnecting. You can find work at other schools, but not in the same district. Elijah, this is too extreme. Extreme? Elijah's voice became ice cold. Do you know what's extreme? Making a 7-year-old child believe her grandmother is sick while her mother is actually dating another man. Do you know what's extreme? Stealing family savings to fund your affair. Elena couldn't argue because she knew he was right. There are other conditions, Elijah continued. You must attend individual psychological counseling for at least 6 months. You must accept regular financial audits. And if you violate this agreement again, if you betray this family again, you will automatically lose custody of Sophie. Elena stared at the document, her fingers trembling. What if I don't sign? Then tomorrow I'll start divorce proceedings. I've already consulted a lawyer, Elena. Given your behavior, I have a good chance of getting full custody of Sophie and most of the property. You'll lose everything. The room fell into long silence. Elena looked at the agreement, then at Elijah, then back at the agreement. Would you really do this? She finally asked. Would you really take Sophie away? I will protect my daughter from further harm, Elijah replied. If that means taking her away from an irresponsible mother, then yes, I will do that. Elena began crying again, but this time with tears of despair. She realized she had no choice. Her perfect plan had failed, her lover had abandoned her, and now she faced the possibility of losing everything. I need a pen, she finally said. Elijah handed her a pen and watched as she signed each page. Each signature represented her acknowledgement of her betrayal and acceptance of constraints on her future behavior. When she finished signing the last page, Elijah collected the documents. This isn't punishment, Elena, he said. This is the process of rebuilding trust. If you truly want to repair this family, you'll accept these conditions and prove you deserve a second chance. Elena nodded, but there was no hope in her eyes, only the despair of defeat. Over the following weeks, Elena's world continued to crumble. She resigned from Wellington Elementary, citing personal reasons. Richard Blackwood also left the school during the same period, reportedly taking a position in another state. Jake Morrison's investigation report revealed even more shocking information. Richard Blackwood had inappropriate relationships with at least 5 married women over the past 10 years, 3 of which resulted in divorce. He had a carefully calculated pattern: target women who felt dissatisfied in their marriages, provide emotional support and financial inducements, then quickly retreat when situations became complicated. Elijah provided this information to the new principal, ensuring Richard would never return to any educational position. He also contacted Richard's previous victims, helping them understand the pattern they had experienced. For Elena, the weight of reality began to show. She not only lost her job, but also most of her friends, as news of the betrayal spread through the community. She was forced to work at a nearby low-paying position, earning half of what she made before. More painful still, she realized Richard had never truly loved her. She was just another target in his conquest game, a temporary toy that could provide excitement and self-validation. When the game became dangerous, he didn't hesitate to abandon her. Elijah observed Elena's transformation, sometimes feeling a hint of sympathy, but mostly focused on rebuilding his and Sophie's lives. 6 months passed, and life in Elijah's house established a new rhythm. Elena fulfilled all conditions in the agreement. She attended psychological counseling, accepted financial supervision, and found a new teaching position at a private school. On the surface, their marriage seemed to be healing. But Elijah knew the truth. Trust, once broken, could never be fully repaired. He and Elena were now more like roommates than spouses, maintaining a civilized coexistence for Sophie's benefit. Sophie seemed to adapt well. She didn't know the full details of what had happened, only that Mommy and Daddy went through some difficulties, but now they're working things out. She performed well in school, had friends, and seemed happy and secure. However, Elijah remained vigilant. He installed monitoring software on Elena's phone and computer, regularly checking her communications and activities. He wasn't paranoid, he was practical. Elena had proven she was capable of complex deception, and he wouldn't be fooled again. One Friday afternoon in fall, Elijah's vigilance proved justified. He was organizing tools in the basement when his phone received an alert. The monitoring software detected Elena using a new encrypted messaging app. Elijah immediately went upstairs and found Elena in the kitchen, focused on typing on her phone, wearing a smile he hadn't seen in months. When she saw Elijah, she quickly closed her phone, but it was too late. "Who's messaging you?" Elijah asked, his voice calm but threatening. "No one important," Elena replied, but her eyes flickered, her typical tell when lying. "Elena, we've talked about the importance of honesty." Elijah approached her. "Give me the phone." "Elijah, you can't check every message I send. I need some privacy. According to our agreement, you gave up the right to privacy, at least during the trust rebuilding period." Elijah extended his hand. "Phone." Elena hesitated, then handed it to him. Elijah opened the encrypted app and found a message thread with a number he didn't recognize. The content of the messages made his blood freeze again. "I miss being with you. Elijah is monitoring closely now, but I'm looking for opportunities. Maybe we can meet during Sophie's school activities. I know we have to be careful, but I can't forget you." Elijah scrolled up and saw more messages, plans for dates, arrangements for secret meetings, even discussions about how to circumvent Elijah's monitoring. Most infuriating was the most recent message. "Richard says he found a job opportunity in a new city. He wants me and Sophie to move there with him." Elijah looked up at Elena, her face having lost all color. "You reconnected with Richard." This wasn't a question, but a statement. "Elijah, I can't explain." "No explanation needed." Elijah's voice was ice cold. "You violated our agreement. You deceived me again, this time even more elaborately. That's not. You're planning to run away with him, taking Sophie." Elijah continued scrolling through messages. "You discussed how to legally gain custody of Sophie, how to make me look unfit as a father." Elena began crying, but Elijah was completely unmoved this time. "Do you know what this means?" he asked. "According to our agreement, this automatically triggers divorce proceedings. You lose custody of Sophie. You lose this house. You lose everything. Please, Elijah, give me another chance." "Another chance?" Elijah laughed, but it was a laugh without humor. "You already had another chance. 6 months ago, when I discovered your first betrayal, I gave you a chance. You used it to plot more complex deception." Elijah took out his phone and dialed Catherine Wells' number. "Catherine, it's Elijah. It's time to start divorce proceedings." Hearing this, Elena frantically grabbed Elijah's arm. "No, please don't do this. Think about Sophie." Elijah gently but firmly removed her hand. "I'm thinking about Sophie. I'm thinking about protecting her from a mother who repeatedly lies, can't be trusted, and is willing to use her to achieve her own goals." "I love Sophie. You love yourself." Elijah corrected her. "If you love Sophie, you wouldn't make her believe lies. If you loved Sophie, you wouldn't plan to take her from the only stable home she knows. If you loved Sophie, you wouldn't use her as a tool in your game with Richard." Catherine confirmed on the phone that she would immediately begin preparing documents. After Elijah hung up, he turned to Elena. I'm giving you 1 hour to pack your personal belongings, he said. Then you leave this house. You can't kick me out. This is my home too. Read Section 12 of the agreement. Elijah said, any major violation results in immediate loss of residency rights. And this house's mortgage is in my name, with my job as collateral. Legally, this is my house. Elena realized she was trapped again. As she went upstairs to pack, Elijah sat in the kitchen, thinking about the next steps. This time there would be no reconciliation, no third chances. Elena had repeatedly proven she couldn't change, couldn't be honest, couldn't put Sophie's welfare above her own desires. When Sophie came home from school, she found her mother loading luggage into the car. "Mommy, where are you going?" she asked, her voice filled with confusion and fear. Elena knelt down and hugged her daughter, tears filling her eyes. "Mommy needs to leave for a while, sweetheart." "How long?" I don't know." Elijah approached them. "Sophie, Mommy will come visit you, but she won't live here anymore." "Like Mrs. Jones and Mr. Jones?" Sophie asked, referring to her friend's divorced parents. "Yes, somewhat like that," Elijah said gently. Sophie nodded, though she clearly didn't fully understand. She accepted this new reality. Elena hugged Sophie one last time, then drove away. Elijah watched her car disappear at the end of the street, feeling a complex mix of emotions: relief, sadness, and a firm determination. The following weeks were a legal war. Elena hired a lawyer and tried to fight for partial custody of Sophie, but her case was weak. Elijah had clear evidence of agreement violations, records of Elena's repeated deception, and proof that Sophie was thriving under his care. The court hearing was decisive. After reviewing all evidence, the judge ruled that Elijah would receive full custody of Sophie, with Elena having only limited supervised visitation. "The court must consider the child's best interests," the judge said. "Given the mother's repeated deceptive behavior and irresponsible judgment, the court finds the child is safest with the father." Elena collapsed when she heard the verdict, but Elijah felt only satisfaction. Justice had been served. 6 months later, Elijah and Sophie's new life was completely stable. Sophie excelled in school. She had friends, participated in extracurricular activities, and seemed happy and secure. She met with Elena every 2 weeks under supervision. But these visits were usually brief because Elena seemed unsure how to truly connect with her daughter without relying on lies and manipulation. Elijah expanded his electrical business, hiring 3 employees. His financial situation was better than ever, and he had more time to spend with Sophie. They established new traditions: Saturday morning pancake breakfasts, Sunday afternoon bike rides, bedtime stories every night. Elena's life, however, was vastly different. She lost most of her friends, had unstable employment, and lived in a small apartment. Richard Blackwood had long since disappeared, reportedly moving to the West Coast to continue his predatory pattern. Elena realized she had been used, abandoned, and left to bear all the consequences. Sometimes, Elijah would think about the life they once had, about who Elena used to be, or who he thought she was. But those thoughts became less frequent, replaced by present satisfaction. One spring afternoon, as Elijah was fixing the fence in the backyard, Sophie ran to his side. "Daddy, I made a drawing at school," she said excitedly, holding up a paper. The drawing showed 2 people standing in front of a house, a tall man and a small girl, both smiling. The sun shone brightly, and there was a dog playing in the yard. They had just adopted a puppy. "It's beautiful, Will," Elijah said, using his nickname for Sophie. "Let's put it on the refrigerator. The teacher asked us to draw our families." Sophie said, "I drew our family." Elijah noticed Elena wasn't in the drawing. This wasn't because Sophie didn't love her mother, but because in Sophie's daily reality, her family was her and Elijah. Elena had become an occasional visitor rather than a core family member. "This is a beautiful family," Elijah told his daughter, lifting her up. That night, after Sophie was asleep, Elijah sat in the backyard, drinking beer and looking at the stars. He thought about the beginning of this entire journey, that afternoon when he discovered the truth at Margaret's house. If he hadn't made the decision to go to Riverside, If he hadn't discovered Elena's betrayal, what would his life be like? He might have continued living in lies, while Elena and Richard continued their plans. Eventually, he might have lost Sophie, lost his home, lost his self-respect. Instead, by facing the truth, by refusing to passively accept betrayal, he protected what truly mattered. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Elijah, this is Elena. I want to talk to you about Sophie. Elijah looked at the message for a long time, then deleted it. He had already said everything he needed to say to Elena. Through the legal system, through lawyers, within proper channels. He didn't need private conversations. No more manipulation attempts. No more emotional blackmail. A few minutes later, another message came. Please, Elijah. I know I made mistakes, but Sophie needs her mother. This time Elijah replied, but only 2 words, through lawyers. Then he blocked the number. Another year passed. Sophie was now 9 years old and adapting well. She occasionally asked questions about her mother, and Elijah always answered honestly, explaining the situation in age-appropriate ways. Sophie knew Daddy and Mommy couldn't live together because they had different ideas about what was right. She knew Mommy did things that made Daddy sad, but she also knew it wasn't her fault. Elijah was careful never to speak badly of Elena in front of Sophie. His revenge wasn't directed at Elena as Sophie's mother, but at her betrayal as his wife. Sophie had the right to maintain a relationship with her mother, even if that relationship was now strictly limited. One fall afternoon, Elijah received a call from Jake Morrison. Do you remember Richard Blackwood? Jake asked. I remember. What about him? He was arrested in California. Embezzlement and sexual harassment. Looks like he continued his old patterns at the new school, but this time he encountered a victim who wasn't so easily manipulated. Elijah felt deep satisfaction. Justice might come slowly, but it eventually arrives. Richard Blackwood was finally facing the consequences he deserved. Does Elena know? Elijah asked. Probably. It's in the news. Elijah hung up, wondering how Elena felt now. Did she regret giving up a stable family to pursue a dream that ultimately proved illusory? Did she understand the value of what she had lost? But these questions quickly faded from his mind. Elena's feelings were no longer his responsibility. Her choices and their consequences belonged to her. Elijah's responsibility was Sophie, providing her with a stable, honest, loving home. In this regard, he had completely succeeded. At dinner, Sophie shared her day at school. She talked about her friends, her projects, her dreams. She was a happy, confident, secure child, full of hope for the future. Daddy, she said while helping clear the dishes, Tommy's dad is going to marry a new mommy. Will you marry a new mommy? Elijah considered the question. Over the past 2 years, he had been completely focused on Sophie and rebuilding their lives. But maybe someday, when the time was right, he might be open to a new relationship. But that person would have to understand that Sophie was his priority, would have to be worthy of both their trust. Maybe someday, he told Sophie, but only when I find someone who truly loves both of us and would never lie or hurt us. Sophie nodded, seeming satisfied with this answer. That night, after Sophie was asleep, Elijah stayed in her room a little longer, looking at her peaceful face. She looked so calm, so secure. This was what he had fought for. This was what made all the pain and difficulty worthwhile. He gently kissed her forehead and turned off the light. In the hallway, Elijah stopped to look at the photos on the wall. There were Sophie's school photos, pictures of them on vacation together, Sophie participating in various activities. One photo was particularly striking. Sophie at her birthday party, surrounded by friends, wearing a huge smile. In that photo, there were no shadows, no secrets, no lies. Just pure joy. This was the world Elijah had created for Sophie. A world built on a foundation of truth and stability. Elena had chosen the path of betrayal and deception. She paid the price for these choices, losing her family, losing Sophie's daily presence, losing the community's respect, losing the man she thought loved her. Elijah chose the path of truth and justice. His reward was Sophie's laughter, her trust, her love, and the inner peace of knowing he had protected what mattered most. In this war over family, loyalty, and morality, the side of justice had won, and the sweetness of this victory would last a lifetime. That's the end of today's story. For more captivating tales, hit subscribe and never miss an episode.